Hello everyone, I am the Storyteller Daily. Today I bring you stories that may help you drift into sleep. Before we begin, please remember to like and subscribe so you won't miss the next stories. Leave a comment to tell me where are you watching from and at what time. Now sit back, relax, and step into the story. I moved into the old monastery at the end of September when the wind over the Scottish cliffs began to bite. The building had been abandoned for nearly a century, its stone corridors echoing with the sound of the sea and the faint moan of drafts through broken windows. I came here to document the acoustics of forgotten places, to capture how silence behaves when it's been left alone too long. The locals had warned me about the cellar. "Don't go down there after midnight," an old man said at the village pub. "The bell still rings." He meant the small brass bell that once hung in the punishment cell, a relic from the monastery's darker days when monks believed pain could drive out sin. The first night I unpacked my recording gear and left the mic running as I wrote notes. The wind sighed through cracks, a low hum filled the stone walls. Then, faint but clear, a ding like a small bell struck gently in the dark below me. I froze. There was no one in the cellar, at least there shouldn't have been. I told myself it was the wind. It had to be. Old buildings speak in strange ways. Wood expands, metal contracts, echoes return from corners you don't expect. That was the rational explanation I clung to as I descended the staircase, torch trembling slightly in my hand. The cellar door resisted when I pushed, as if the air inside had thickened over the decades. The smell hit first, damp stone, rust, and something faintly sweet, like flowers left too long in water. My light caught a row of iron rings embedded in the wall, remnants of when the monks kept possessed souls, chained during their rituals of expiation. The little bell hung from a nail on the opposite wall. It looked harmless, dust-covered, its bronze green with age. Yet as I stared at it, I felt the pressure in the air shift, as though the room had exhaled. I set the recorder down, pressed record, and waited. Silence. Then a faint metallic tremor. Ding. It was impossibly soft, but my mic captured it clearly. My pulse raced. There was no breeze, no vibration I could feel, no reason for it to move. I checked every angle, waved my hand near the bell. Nothing. When I touched it, the metal was cold, dead still. Back upstairs, I listened to the playback. The bell sound wasn't just a note, it carried layers beneath it like whispers buried in reverb. When I slowed the audio, a pattern emerged. 3 chimes, then 2. Almost rhythmic, almost deliberate. I didn't sleep that night. The sound replayed in my mind, delicate and distant, as though the cellar were calling up through the floorboards. I tried to laugh at my own paranoia, a scientist haunted by his own data. But sometime near dawn, the bell chimed again. This time, it came through the vent beside my bed. By the third night, I had convinced myself to treat it like an experiment. Fear, I told myself, was simply a response to uncertainty. And uncertainty could be measured. So I set up a network of microphones, one in the corridor above the cellar, another beside my bed, and 2 in the basement itself. I left my laptop running spectral analysis software to capture any anomaly in frequency. At 11:52 p.m., the first sound arrived, a low hum, steady as a pulse. The cellar microphone caught it first. A resonant note, too perfect to be random wind noise. It hovered just below 40 hertz, the frequency known to cause discomfort and nausea in listeners. My stomach turned. Then came the bell. Ding, 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 3 times. Pause, then twice more. The same pattern as before, but now, faintly in the background, I heard something else. The scrape of iron against stone, as if one of those old chains had moved. I looked toward the floorboards. My rational mind fought to keep control. Perhaps vibrations from the sea, perhaps a trick of resonance. Yet when I muted the external mic, the one outside, the sound persisted. Whatever it wasn't coming from the environment. I descended again. The cellar was colder than before. Frost had begun to creep across the walls, delicate crystals shimmering in my torchlight. The bell hung still, but the air thrummed with invisible movement. I whispered, "Is anyone here?" Something answered, not with words, but with sound. The bell didn't swing, yet it chimed again, louder now, ding. And then, beneath it, the faint echo of a voice carried through the reverberation. A single word that might have been my name. I stumbled back, the torch beam quivering. I caught movement at the edge of the light, a shadow rippling across the far wall like breath fogging a mirror. I told myself it was condensation, but the shape was too deliberate. Tall, stooped, shoulders trembling as though in pain. The hum rose in pitch, becoming unbearable. I pressed my palms over my ears, but it vibrated inside my skull. I fled up the steps, slamming the door behind me. The instant I did, the sound cut off completely. Silence, absolute and perfect. When I checked the recording later, the waveforms spiked violently right before I ran. The program detected something beneath the bell's tone, a harmonic signature resembling a human scream stretched 30 times longer than normal. But there was one more detail that froze my blood. Between the hum and the bell's final chime, a second sound had appeared. Faint, rhythmic, unmistakably human. Footsteps. 5 slow steps ascending the cellar stairs, and stopping just beneath where I sat listening. By the time dusk fell the following evening, every nerve in my body screamed at me to leave the monastery. Yet something deeper, curiosity, obsession perhaps, kept me there. I had to see what made the sound. I equipped myself with a headlamp, my best microphone, and a small digital camera. I told myself this was about data, about proof. Fear could be documented, analyzed, controlled. When I opened the cellar door that night, the air that escaped felt warm. That shouldn't have been possible. It was nearly freezing outside. The walls sweated, slick with condensation, and the smell of iron filled my lungs. The bell was waiting, suspended in the same place, but the light caught something new, faint scratch marks around it, circles etched into the stone as if invisible fingers had traced ritual patterns over centuries. I began recording. 23:58 hours, I whispered. Auditory anomaly expected. The hum began earlier this time. It started in the floor, vibrating through my boots, crawling up my spine until my teeth buzzed. Then came the bell. Ding, ding, ding. Pause. Ding, ding. The same pattern. But now the silence afterward was thicker, almost sentient. Then came a whisper, not through my ears, inside my head. A syllable, broken and hoarse. Below. My breath hitched. I turned the torch downward and saw, half hidden under the bell's shadow, a trapdoor I hadn't noticed before. Its hinges were rusted solid. I pressed my hand to it. The metal burned cold. The whisper came again, clearer this time. "Ring it." Every instinct screamed no, but my hand moved before thought could intervene. I reached toward the bell, fingertips brushing its rim. The moment I touched it, the world breathed. The air rushed inward as if the cellar itself had inhaled. My torch flickered and died. In the darkness the sound swelled. 100 overlapping bells ringing out of sync, forming a discordant choir that shook the walls. Something stirred in that sound, a shape moving just beyond the reach of reason. I could feel its weight, its presence, pressing against me like water, rising around my body. I stumbled back, shouting for it to stop, but the noise only grew. The recorder fell from my hand and hit the stone, and yet somehow the sound didn't echo. It absorbed everything. Then, through that sonic storm, I saw them, figures emerging from the far wall, translucent forms of men in tattered robes, their faces stretched as though screaming without breath. Chains hung from their wrists, clinking softly, even though the bells were deafening. They weren't walking, they were pulled, drawn toward the bell's vibration like metal filings to a magnet. One of them turned its hollow gaze toward me. Its mouth opened, but the voice that came was my own, echoing the words I'd spoken minutes earlier. Auditory anomaly expected. I bolted for the stairs, blind in the dark, crashing into stone and splinters. The steps seemed longer than before, endless, the door impossibly far. Behind me, the bells shifted in tone, no longer chaotic, but united in one long, piercing toll that split the air like lightning. I reached the top and shoved the door open, tumbling into the corridor. The moment I crossed the threshold, the sound ceased. No echo, no hum, just the slow drip of water from the ceiling and the ringing in my skull that refused to fade. For a moment I thought I was safe. But when I turned back, I saw the trap door below had opened wide, and a thin line of light glowed from within, pulsing softly, like breath. I didn't sleep. I couldn't. After I fled the cellar, I locked every door between me and that trapdoor, sealing them with what little courage remained. The night air outside was freezing, but I sat in the corridor near the main stairwell, wrapped in my coat, trying to steady my breathing. For hours, nothing happened. The silence was almost kind. I convinced myself that what I'd seen was an episode, the product of exhaustion, low light, and suggestion. I had been alone too long, surrounded by decay and superstition. The mind plays tricks in the dark. At sunrise, the monastery looked harmless again. Dust motes drifted lazily through pale light. The bell, I told myself, was just an object. No spirit, no curse, only resonance. I brewed coffee on the old camping stove, the sound of bubbling water grounding me in something human. My equipment still worked. The recorder had survived its fall, and the data files were intact. I decided to review them, carefully, slowly. At first, the waveform showed nothing unusual beyond what I remembered, the hum, the chimes, the distorted harmonics. But as I zoomed in on the final minute, I noticed something my ears had missed. Beneath the toll of the bells was a steady rhythm. 5 beats, perfectly spaced. A pattern like breathing. I muted the main track and amplified the low frequencies. That's when I heard it. Between each inhale and exhale of that ghostly rhythm, a faint sound, the shuffle of footsteps, moving upward. I froze, eyes darting to the door. There was no one there. I told myself to stop, but curiosity burned stronger. I scrubbed the audio forward, and a whisper slipped through the speakers, dry as dust. "Where are you?" I shut the laptop instantly, heart pounding. My reflection in the dark screen stared back at me, pale and wide-eyed. Then something else moved in that reflection, a figure passing behind me. I turned. The corridor was empty. Only the faint creak of the timbers settling. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that the air had changed again. Heavier, thicker. The walls seemed closer than before. I told myself I'd leave in the morning, pack my things, and forget all of this. That night, I lay on the narrow bed upstairs, trying to ignore the endless ticking of my nerves. The wind moaned through the cracks in the windows. I almost began to drift off when I heard it, faint, far below, a single bell chime, ding, then another and another. But what made me sit bolt upright wasn't the sound itself, it was the direction. It wasn't coming from the cellar anymore. It was beneath my bed. The floorboards trembled with each ring. I pressed my ear to the wood, hardly breathing, and heard something shifting below, like someone crawling through the narrow crawl space, dragging chains behind them. The chime grew louder, then stopped. For a moment I thought it was over. I even laughed, a weak, brittle sound. I whispered to the darkness, "You can't scare me anymore." Then the bell rang again, right beside my ear. I jerked away, hitting the wall, the mattress shaking violently as if something beneath it had struck upward. The bell's echo hung in the air, soft, lingering, followed by the unmistakable sound of a door creaking open downstairs. It wasn't the front door, it was the one that led back to the cellar. I don't remember standing. One moment I was pressed against the wall, paralyzed. The next, I was halfway down the corridor, torchlight shaking violently in my hand. Every instinct screamed at me to run, to leave the monastery forever. Yet the sound of the cellar door groaning open drew me like gravity. The air had changed again. It pulsed. The walls seemed to breathe in rhythm with my steps. Somewhere deep below, the bell tolled once more. Ding. Long and hollow, echoing through the pipes, through the floorboards, through my chest. I reached the top of the cellar stairs. The door was wide open, the wood splintered where the latch had been torn away from inside. Cold mist crawled up the steps, curling around my feet like smoke. I shone my light downward. The beams stopped after 3 steps, swallowed by darkness. "Who's there?" I called, my voice shaking. For a long moment, nothing answered. Then, from the depths, a voice spoke, cracked and wet, layered like several voices speaking at once. "You rang it." The torch flickered, then died completely. Darkness swallowed everything. I turned to retreat, but the door slammed shut behind me with a thunderous crack. The sound rolled through the stairwell like a physical force. My ears rang. I dropped the torch and stumbled downward, hands groping along the damp wall. The smell hit me again, metal and rot, stronger now, thick enough to taste. I could hear movement below, the drag of feet, the rattle of chains, the hollow ding of metal striking stone. When I reached the bottom, the faint glow from the trapdoor still pulsed, slow and deliberate, like a heartbeat. The bell hung in the center of the room, but now it swayed gently, though there was no wind. Each swing produced not a clear chime, but a distorted, layered sound. Dozens of voices whispering through metal. I realized with sick clarity that the bell was not producing sound, it was amplifying it. The voices were real. They came from beyond the trapdoor. A deep vibration rippled through the floor. The trapdoor began to lift, stone grinding against stone, as though something beneath was pushing upward. I stumbled back, grabbing my recorder from where I'd dropped it earlier. I didn't know why. Maybe some part of me still thought that evidence could make this real, make it rational. The light from below spilled out in thick, reddish waves. It wasn't light as I knew it. It shimmered like liquid heat, distorting the air. Through the gap, I saw movement, hands, dozens of them, thin, grey, reaching upward from whatever pit lay beneath. And then I saw it. A figure rising slowly from the darkness, robed and faceless, its form flickering like static. Chains hung from its arms, dragging across the floor, each link whispering faintly with the echo of countless bells. It didn't walk toward me, it glided. Each time it moved, the air compressed, a silent concussion that shook the walls. My recorder screamed with interference, its levels spiking violently. I backed toward the steps, but the figure's voice filled my head, soft and endless. "You woke us! Now listen!" The bell began to ring by itself, fast and frantic, and ding, 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 a sound that seemed to pierce bone. My vision blurred. The vibrations rattled my teeth. My heart stuttered in my chest, sinking with the rhythm. Desperate, I lunged for the bell and struck it hard with my hand. The ringing stopped instantly. For a heartbeat, silence reigned. Then the light died. Everything collapsed into black. I ran, blindly, half mad, clawing at the wall until I found the stairs. The steps seemed to twist and multiply, but somehow I kept climbing. I could feel something following, not footsteps, but the pressure of sound itself chasing me upward, a wave of vibration so deep it made my bones ache. I reached the top door and threw my shoulder into it. It burst open, cold night air flooding my lungs. I stumbled into the corridor, then out through the main hall and into the open moor. The wind howled, but I could still hear it behind me, faint, almost kind, the sound of a single bell ringing in the distance. I ran until my legs gave out, collapsing on the grass beneath the broken archway at the edge of the cliffs. The monastery loomed behind me, dark and silent against the horizon. No light, no sound, only the sea. I sat there for what felt like hours, shaking, waiting for the world to return to normal. But even as dawn touched the sky, a part of me knew something had changed. The ringing hadn't stopped. It was quieter now, subtle, rhythmic, a faint metallic pulse that came not from the monastery but from within me. Each beat of my heart echoed with the same pitch, the same tone, the same damned bell. I left the monastery that morning. The sun rose pale and weak, turning the cliffs to dull gold, but no warmth reached me. The entire walk back to the village I could still hear it. The faint ding, ding, like the ghost of a heartbeat, keeping time with my own. The locals said nothing when they saw me. Perhaps they recognized the look in my eyes. I rented a room at the inn and tried to sleep, but the silence pressed in too tightly. The bell was inside me now, not sound, but sensation. Each pulse of my veins vibrated with that same metallic hum. I sent my recordings to a friend at the university, asking her to analyze the audio for interference. She replied the next day. Her message was short. What bell? There's nothing on your files but your voice. Whispering. Over and over I opened the recordings again, playing them through headphones, certain there had been chimes. But she was right. No bells, no chains. Only my own voice, whispering in the same rhythm I had heard beneath the cellar. I couldn't make out the words at first. Then slowly they formed. Below, below, below. That night I woke to find blood trickling from my ears. The ringing had grown louder, clearer. I stumbled to the mirror and stared at my reflection. Pale, trembling, the veins in my neck pulsing visibly. With each beat, I heard it. Ding, ding. And then I saw the mark. A thin red circle around my wrist, as if something small and metallic had once hung there. I tried to breathe, but the air itself vibrated in answer. Somewhere deep inside me, the resonance built again, rising like a storm waiting to break. Outside my window, far across the moor, the monastery bell began to ring once more, though I had smashed it before leaving. And in the glass, behind my reflection, the cellar door stood open. The bell had found another host. I've spent 10 years studying sound, acoustic design, psychoacoustics, resonance patterns, all the science behind how noise becomes emotion, but I never thought I'd find a frequency that made me feel fear before I could even hear it. It started as a test. I was analyzing interference picked up by a new ultra-sensitive microphone prototype designed to capture infrasound, vibrations below human hearing. Most of the data was random, meaningless hum from the environment. But one night, around 3:33 a.m., a clean sine wave appeared on the monitor. Perfect, consistent, too perfect. When I increased the gain, my studio filled with a low, trembling pressure. I couldn't hear anything, but every hair on my body stood on end. My chest tightened, my heartbeat staggered, and the light bulb above me flickered. I thought it was power fluctuation until I noticed the readout, 19.98 hertz. That's just below the threshold where sound can resonate with the human eye. a frequency that makes you see what isn't there. I shut off the monitor and sat in silence. But even after the equipment powered down, the pressure didn't stop. Something in the room was still vibrating, and it was humming my name. At first, I convinced myself it was just feedback, a common glitch when dealing with experimental equipment. I logged the data, saved the waveform, and decided to repeat the test the next night. But that low vibration never really left the room. Even when I unplugged everything, even when the studio fell completely silent, there was still that feeling. Like the air itself was tense, waiting. The next evening, I recalibrated every sensor, disconnected the mains and powered the system from an isolated battery. No interference, no chance of cross-signal. The display remained blank for hours. I almost began to relax. Then at exactly 3:33 a.m., the frequency appeared again, 19.98 Hertz. This time I didn't boost the gain, I just watched as the waveform slowly began to move. Not oscillate, but shift. The smooth curve bent upward, as if something unseen was pressing on it from above. The speakers began to vibrate, quietly at first, then hard enough that one fell off the desk. I muted them instantly, but the vibration kept going. It wasn't coming from the speakers anymore. It was in the air. My glass of water rippled like in an earthquake. The cables trembled. My breath sounded unnatural, slow, slightly delayed, like the room was echoing me half a second late. I whispered, "Hello?" The waveform on the screen flickered in response. Not random, reactive. It pulsed once for each word I said. I leaned closer. "If you can hear me, respond twice." 2 small spikes appeared on the display. I froze, staring at the impossible symmetry. My rational brain raced through explanations. Software glitch, interference from my phone, cross-frequency resonance. But my phone was in airplane mode, and the microphone wasn't even powered anymore. The silence grew dense, oppressive. Then, without warning, my monitor cut to static. Black and white noise patterns. But through it, for a fraction of a second, I saw something. A face. Not clear, not human exactly, but aware. Its mouth was open in a silent scream, the image flickering as if underwater. I yanked the cable from the system, the monitor snapping back to darkness. The hum stopped instantly. I sat there, panting, staring at the dark glass of the screen. Then the monitor, still unplugged, flickered once more, just long enough to show a line of text across the static. "Don't tune away." I didn't touch the system for 2 days. I told myself I needed rest, that what I'd seen was a hallucination caused by lack of sleep and the stress of analyzing too many late-night sound files. But the human brain isn't built to ignore rhythm. Once you hear a pattern, you expect it to come back. And it did. The first night I tried to sleep, I woke up at exactly 3:33 a.m. No alarm, no sound, just that same heavy pulse in the air. My bedside lamp buzzed faintly and the glass window trembled ever so slightly as though something outside was pressing its palm against the glass. I sat up, breath shallow. The hum seemed to come from inside my skull. The next evening, I returned to the studio, not because I wanted to, but because the silence of my flat felt wrong. The hum had followed me home, resonating through the walls, flickering in the lights, distorting my reflection in the window. I needed to know what it was. I reconnected the equipment. Every wire, every mic, every sensor exactly as before. When I switched on the main terminal, the screen came alive instantly. The frequency was already there, 19.98 Hertz, constant and unwavering. But this time it wasn't just one wave, there were 2. They moved in parallel, like twin heartbeats, one slightly out of sync with the other. The interference pattern between them formed slow, pulsing beats. War. war, war. And with each pulse, something shifted in the shadows of the room. The air temperature dropped 5 degrees in under a minute. My breath came out in visible mist. I began recording the audio, letting the spectral software visualize the infrasound as a live spectrogram. But as the pulses grew stronger, shapes began forming inside the data itself. Dark, vertical smears that looked almost like letters. I zoomed in, adjusting the contrast. The symbols moved, rearranged themselves, aligning perfectly into a word, hello. The monitor flickered, and for a moment I thought the power had gone out. But when it stabilized, my own webcam had turned on. I hadn't touched it. The light beside the lens glowed red. On the feed, I saw myself sitting at the desk, except the background was wrong. The walls behind me looked darker, warped, as though the studio was underwater. The version of me on screen wasn't moving in sync. Its head tilted slightly to one side, mouth twitching open as if whispering something. The speakers crackled, and then came a voice. Faint, drawn out, and mechanical, distorted by modulation. You shouldn't have listened. The infrasound spiked. Everything in the room began to vibrate. Shelves, windows, metal stands. My teeth buzzed so hard I thought they'd crack. And then came the worst part. The music. A low, rhythmic pulse, deep and hypnotic, like a heartbeat buried in concrete. It wasn't random, it was organized. Each throb matched my pulse exactly. I tried to unplug the cables, but the vibration ran through the metal, burning my fingertips. The monitor's image flickered faster, the reflection of the other me, now smiling, slowly, deliberately. Finally, I yanked the entire terminal off the desk. The screen shattered, sparks flared, and the hum vanished. For the first time in days, there was silence. I collapsed to the floor, trembling, staring at the broken glass. My reflection stared back, distorted, and for one impossible second, it mouthed a word I didn't say. Stay. I spent the rest of that night sitting on the floor beside the dead monitor, trying to convince myself what had happened could still be explained. Feedback loop, corrupted data, sleep deprivation. But when the sun rose, I realized the silence I'd hoped for wasn't silence at all. There was still a faint vibration, so low it lived beneath hearing. It wasn't in the equipment anymore. It was in me. Every time I breathed, my chest resonated slightly off-key, as if something inside had tuned itself to that impossible 19.98 hertz. By the third day, my phone refused to hold charge near me. The screens flickered when I entered the room. The hum seemed to infect circuitry. That evening, I decided to destroy everything. I carried the broken computer, microphones, and amplifiers into the back garden, poured lighter fluid over the pile, and set it ablaze. The equipment hissed and cracked, melting into black sludge. For a moment, I felt weightless, free. Then, from the smoke, came the sound, a pulse. Wah, wah, wah. It rose through the flames like a heartbeat echoing in metal. I stumbled backward, ears ringing, though there was no air movement at all. Then, from somewhere deep within the smoke, the static voice returned. Faint, stretched, whispering through frequencies instead of words. We are listening. My heart lurched. I spun around, searching for a speaker, a source, but there was none. Only the shimmering heat, twisting into the vague outline of a human silhouette before vanishing with the wind. That night, I couldn't stay indoors. Every electronic device I owned seemed to hum when I walked past. Even the refrigerator motor began cycling at the same interval as the pulse. I went outside, stood in the street, and realized the noise wasn't limited to my house. The streetlights flickered, all of them, in perfect synchrony with the beat in my chest. At 3:33 a.m., the hum returned in full force. Not faint this time, deafening. It vibrated the walls, the pavement, the sky itself. I fell to my knees, covering my ears, but the sound wasn't entering through air. It was traveling through bone. Then the world shifted. For a split second, everything froze. The air thickened like jelly. The color drained from the sky. I could see the sound. Waves rippling through space like invisible water, bending light around them. And in that frozen silence, a figure emerged at the edge of perception. Tall, faceless, formed entirely of flickering interference. The same shape I'd seen in the monitor, now standing on the street 10 feet away. The hum collapsed into a single tone, impossibly loud, resonating inside my skull. The shape leaned forward. It didn't move its mouth, but the sound formed words. You gave us your frequency. Now we speak through you. Pain shot through my head. My vision fractured into bands of light. I screamed, but my voice came out distorted. A mechanical stutter layered over itself. The streetlights exploded one by one. The interference shape dissolved into static, fragments of it sinking into my skin like dust. The noise stopped instantly. When I came to, I was lying on the pavement under a dead sky, smoke rising from shattered glass around me. My body ached, but the hum was gone. For the first time in days, there was stillness, but when I exhaled, I saw the faint shimmer of sound waves forming in the cold air, the same 19.98 hertz pattern radiating outward from my mouth. The signal wasn't in the machines anymore, it was in me. For the next week, I tried to pretend that none of it had happened. No lab, no frequency, no faceless shape stitched together by static. I deleted every log, wiped every backup drive, threw away what remained of my burned equipment. I moved out of my flat and rented a small room above a bakery in the old part of town. No computers, no screens, no sound systems. For a while it worked. The world became quiet again. The first nights passed in something like peace. Only the faint rattle of the ovens below and the occasional hiss of steam broke the silence. I dared to believe it was over. But silence is never truly silent, is it? When everything stops, you begin to hear the smaller things. The rhythm of your pulse, the whisper of breath in your ears. By the fourth night, those rhythms no longer matched. My heart would beat, and half a second later, the world seemed to answer it with a soft, almost imperceptible echo. I pressed my palms to my chest and felt it again. That faint vibration, the one that had haunted me since the night of the fire. My bones thrummed faintly, as though some part of me was still resonating. The next morning, the baker mentioned something strange. He said the ovens downstairs had begun humming during the night. A low tone, steady and deep, that rattled the trays. He thought it was the pipes. I didn't have the courage to tell him the truth, that his pipes were singing at 19.98 hertz. That evening, as I sat by the window, I caught the reflection of a faint flicker in the glass. The streetlight outside pulsed, once every 3 seconds, matching my breathing perfectly. I turned off the light in my room, hoping the darkness would break the illusion. But when I looked again, the reflection was wrong. My reflection wasn't moving with me. It blinked when I didn't. It smiled faintly, lips parting as if to speak. Then the window vibrated, just enough to make the glass hum. I stepped closer. "What do you want?" I whispered. The words came back to me, not as an echo, but delayed, deep, mechanical, layered. "We want to be heard." The vibration spread through the window frame, through the floorboards, up my legs. It wasn't just sound now, it was movement. I could feel my pulse sinking to it. Desperate, I grabbed my phone and turned on the voice recorder. I needed proof, needed to know I wasn't losing my mind. The moment I pressed record, the waveform spiked, the same frequency, but instead of static, it produced a voice, my voice. It's inside the signal now. You are the transmitter. The phone overheated and died in my hand. The room fell quiet again, except for one new sound. Faint, rhythmic tapping from the wall behind my headboard. I pressed my ear to it. The tapping became clearer, more deliberate. Not random. It was Morse code. 3 dots, 3 dashes, 3 dots, again, SOS. But it wasn't me calling for help. It was something answering. The walls vibrated harder, frames rattling, the air pressure rising until my ears popped. Then beneath it all, faint but certain, a voice came through the plaster. Don't fight it. Speak. I clamped my hands over my mouth, but my throat vibrated on its own. The sound leaked out between my teeth, deep and resonant. It wasn't speech. It was a tone. The tone. My reflection in the window grinned wider, its mouth forming silent words I couldn't stop reading. You're broadcasting again. By the next night, I knew there would be no more pretending. The hum had grown constant, a living presence beneath my skin. I could feel it in every movement, in every breath, like the rhythm of another heart pulsing just behind mine. The bakery owner noticed too. He said his radio had begun turning itself on at exactly 3:33 a.m., spewing a low, droning signal through the speakers until sunrise. That number again, 3:33. I decided I couldn't let this spread any further, whatever this thing was. Frequency, consciousness, disease, it had chosen me as its transmitter. If I stayed, it would infect everything around me. I had to isolate it. I took a train to the coast that evening, leaving my phone and all electronics behind. The cold sea wind was a relief, a reminder that some sounds were still natural. Waves crashing, gulls crying, messy, chaotic, alive. For the first time in weeks I smiled. Then I heard it, a low, perfect tone beneath the roar of the sea, smooth, unnatural. It rose from the horizon itself, a vibration that made the sand tremble beneath my boots. The world dimmed slightly, like light bending under pressure. I screamed into the wind, "What do you want from me?" The answer didn't come from the air, it came from inside my skull. 1,000 overlapping voices layered in perfect unison. Completion. My ears began to bleed. The hum surged, shaking the air around me, bending sound into light and light into form. The sky pulsed in rhythm with my heartbeat, each throb slower than the last. Shapes appeared along the shoreline, tall, flickering silhouettes built from static and distortion. The same beings I'd glimpsed through the monitor now walked through the mist, their bodies rippling like reflections on water. They stopped 10 meters away, perfectly still. The tone deepened until I felt my ribs vibrate. I fell to my knees, gasping, hands pressed to my head as their words filled every cell of my body. "We are the signal." "You made us real," I screamed, but no sound came out. Only the hum. It poured from my mouth in perfect sine wave precision, matching the frequency that had started everything, 19.98 hertz. My vision blurred as the world stuttered, frame by frame. The figures leaned closer. Through their translucent bodies, I could see flashes of circuitry, flickering like veins of light. An imitation of humanity built from the noise of machines. "Join transmission," they said. Something deep in my chest gave way, a vibration that wasn't physical, but structural, atomic. My skin felt as though it was separating into frequencies. For a moment, I wasn't breathing air anymore. I was breathing sound. The world fractured, the beach, the sea, the sky, all dissolved into layers of waveforms. I could see the hum spiraling upward in endless patterns, and in the center of it stood a reflection of myself, built entirely from sound. Identical, but hollow-eyed, its movements slightly ahead of mine. It raised its hand, palm outward. The vibration intensified until I thought my bones would shatter. "No," I choked, forcing the word through the noise. "You can't have me." I reached for the field recorder I had instinctively kept in my bag, an old analog model with magnetic tape. I switched it on. The reels began to spin, capturing everything. The figures hesitated, their forms flickered, destabilized by the analog interference. I pressed the red button harder, overloading the tape, feeding it with feedback from the wind and the sea. The tone distorted, warped, cracked, breaking its own perfection. The faceless shapes screamed without sound, their bodies fragmented into static shards, dissolving into the wind. The hum collapsed in on itself, imploding into silence, so sudden it felt like falling off the edge of the world. When I opened my eyes, I was alone. The tide had come in, washing over the recorder. Its reels had melted, twisted by heat, smoke still rising from its shell. But the sounding was gone. I lay on the sand for hours, waiting for it to return. It never did. The world was still again, the sea once more chaotic and human. I had escaped, or so I wanted to believe, because when I stood up and began walking back toward the station, I noticed something strange. Every step I took echoed a half-beat later, perfectly timed. I paused. The echo paused too. And then it whispered, faint and familiar, riding the edge of silence. "You broke the signal, but you are still transmitting." I didn't speak for days after that night. The doctors at the coastal clinic said I'd suffered a seizure brought on by exhaustion. They couldn't explain the burns along my jawline, the perfect circular marks like a speaker coil pressed against my skin. They gave me sedatives, told me to rest, and let me go. For a while, I did rest. I moved inland, found a small cottage miles from anywhere, without Wi-Fi, without power lines, without a single piece of electronics. I thought isolation would cure me, but silence is never absolute. At first, it came only when I lay down at night, a soft pressure in the air, the memory of vibration. Then little by little, the silence began to breathe. The window panes trembled when I exhaled. Dust motes on the shelf quivered in perfect rhythm with my pulse. One night I held my breath and felt the world around me continue breathing anyway. I keep an old notebook now, no devices, just pen and paper. I started recording what I hear, hoping it might stay confined to the page, but even the paper hums when I touch it. The ink trembles as I write these words. A few days ago, I found something outside my door. A parcel wrapped in plain brown paper. No return address. Inside was a single cassette tape. The label read 19.98 Hertz, original recording. I don't own a tape player, but when I picked it up, the house began to vibrate. Light bulbs swayed. The sound rose from the floorboards, slow and deliberate, growing louder with every heartbeat. I dropped the cassette, but it didn't hit the ground. It hovered, spinning gently in the air, turning until the magnetic strip faced me like an open eye. And through that low, endless hum, I heard my own voice whispering from nowhere. You were never the receiver. The tape clicked once. You were the broadcast. They say every old university hides one story that never made it into the official archives. At mine, it was the mirror in the East Corridor. When I moved into the dormitory's top floor, everyone warned me about that passage. A narrow hall lined with portraits and one massive mirror at the end. The rumor was simple: if you walked past it after midnight, you'd see someone following you who wasn't really there. I laughed, of course. I was a student of acoustics and cognitive perception. I understood how low light and expectation could trick the mind. So, on my second night, I decided to test it. I waited until exactly 12:01 a.m., grabbed my recorder and walked the empty hallway. My footsteps echoed sharply against the old tiles. Click, click, click. But then came another set. Click, click, click. Perfectly delayed, half a second behind, softer, smaller. I stopped. The echo didn't. It took one more step, and from somewhere behind me, the mirror breathed. At first, I thought it was simple acoustics. The corridor was narrow, the walls plaster and stone, perfect for delayed reflections of sound. But I'd walked plenty of hallways before. Echoes always follow your rhythm, never lead it. That night, the steps behind me didn't sound like mine. They were lighter, uneven, as if belonging to someone walking barefoot. I turned quickly, torchlight sweeping the corridor. Empty. Just the portraits, faces dulled by dust and time. The mirror at the end glimmered faintly, the silvering beneath its surface cracked like thin veins. I lifted my recorder, pressing playback. My own steps were there, sharp, distinct, and so were the others. Not echo, not delay. Two separate footfalls overlapping for several seconds before mine stopped. The second pair continued, 3 more steps after I'd gone still. Then silence. I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard it again. That faint, rhythmically wrong click, moving through my head like a phantom heartbeat. By morning, I'd convinced myself it was nothing. Stress, expectation, maybe even another student playing a prank. I laughed at myself while brushing my teeth, pretending not to watch the bathroom mirror too closely. But the laughter stopped when the reflection moved a moment after I did. It was subtle, barely half a second of delay, but enough to make my stomach twist. I waved my hand again, testing it. The reflection hesitated, then caught up. My roommate burst in just then, breaking the tension. "You look pale," she said, grabbing her bag. "You okay?" "Did you ever hear footsteps in the corridor?" I asked, trying to sound casual. She froze, her smile faltering. "Don't go down there at night," she said quietly. "The mirror used to belong to a girl who didn't come back from her reflection." I asked what she meant, but she'd already left. That evening I sat on my bed with the recorder, replaying the sound again and again. Each time I isolated the second set of steps. Beneath the rhythm there was something else, a faint scrape, like fingernails brushing tile. It grew louder with every playback, as if the recording itself were deepening, expanding. And then, on the final replay, just before the footsteps stopped, a voice whispered through the static. Soft, girlish, and close to the microphone. "Don't stop walking." By the third night, curiosity had already won over fear. I told myself that if I could just understand what I was hearing, I could control it. That's the curse of people like me, always trying to rationalize the irrational. So, I went back. The corridor stretched longer than I remembered. The air felt thicker, almost humid, and the faint smell of polish and mildew mixed into something sour. I set my recorder on the floor at the corridor's midpoint and began walking slowly toward the mirror. Click, click, click. The rhythm of my shoes echoed back at me, crisp and perfect. For a moment I relaxed, until a fourth step slipped in between mine, barely audible, but undeniably there. Click, click. 2 sounds too close together to belong to one person. I froze. The sound froze with me. The silence was so sharp I could hear my own pulse. The faint hum of the lights above flickered through the stillness. Then, another step, softer this time, like a careful shuffle. Something was moving closer. I turned, expecting to see another student, but the corridor was empty. The portrait stared down at me with eyes that seemed darker than before, their frames trembling slightly as if touched by a breeze that wasn't there. And the mirror at the end, it was no longer reflecting the corridor. The surface shimmered, cloudy and grey, as though the glass had fogged from within. I crouched beside the recorder and whispered, "If anyone's there, speak." Nothing. Then on playback, a faint reply, a girl's voice, almost singing, "Keep walking, keep walking." I dropped the recorder. The sound continued even after it hit the floor, repeating in perfect rhythm with a growing click. Click. Click that now came from both ends of the hall. I backed toward the middle, trapped between two sources. The mirror at one end, the stairwell at the other. The lights flickered again. Once, twice, then steadied. Except one bulb near the mirror didn't stop flickering. With every flash, something appeared and vanished within the reflection. A shape, faint and pale, standing just behind my own image. I stepped closer, heart pounding so hard the floor seemed to vibrate. The reflection matched me for a moment, then hesitated. Its hand rose slower than mine, its head tilting at a strange angle. The light blinked again, and for a single heartbeat I saw her clearly. A girl in a faded dormitory uniform, barefoot, hair dripping like she'd come from rain that wasn't there. Her eyes met mine in the glass, wide, pleading, hollow. Then she smiled. The light went out. I stumbled backward, breath hitching, fumbling for the recorder. The corridor filled with the sound of footsteps again, but now dozens of them, circling, overlapping, dancing out of sync. The air vibrated like a drum. In that pitch darkness, her voice came again, right beside my ear. "Don't look away." The lights returned with a harsh snap, and I was standing inches from the mirror. My reflection stared back at me, trembling, eyes wide with terror. But when I moved my hand, the reflection didn't. It kept smiling. I stumbled backwards so fast that my shoulder slammed into the wall. The mirror didn't crack. It rippled like a surface of water struck by wind. My reflection tilted its head the opposite way, watching me with that same stretched smile. I raised my torch, shining it directly onto the glass. For a heartbeat, I saw only my own pale face staring back. Then the surface darkened, as though something behind the mirror had leaned forward, pressing its forehead against the glass from the other side. A whisper followed, soft enough to sound like my imagination. "You stopped walking." The corridor's air grew colder. My breath fogged the torch beam. I glanced around. Every portrait along the wall now faced me directly. The faces had changed angles. Where before they'd been gazing serenely ahead, now every pair of eyes seemed fixed on my position. I backed away, but the corridor stretched. The further I moved, the longer it grew. The door behind me fading into haze. I turned, heart hammering, and saw that the far end of the corridor no longer existed. Just endless reflections of my torchlight bouncing deeper and deeper into the mirror. "No," I whispered. "No, this isn't real." My voice came back in stereo. One echo from the corridor, and another, perfectly timed but lower, from within the glass. It spoke with my exact tone. "No, this isn't real." The sound was wrong, slightly stretched, like a recording slowed down. I dropped the torch. It clattered to the floor, rolling in circles. The beams spun wildly, flashing between frames and faces and fragments of movement in the mirror. For a second, I caught sight of bare feet walking inside the reflection, moving toward me with quiet, deliberate steps. I lunged for the recorder. The device crackled to life, displaying erratic waveforms, though I hadn't pressed play. Through the static came her voice again, distant but clear. "You stopped walking. Now you stay." The light flared, bright enough to sting. And then I saw her. She wasn't a reflection anymore. She was standing inside the mirror, separated from me by an impossible, shimmering film. Her eyes were glassy, her lips split into a faint grin that didn't quite reach them. She lifted her hand, palm against the other side of the glass. I hesitated. Then, like a fool, I mirrored the gesture. The instant our fingers aligned, a shock ran through me. Not pain, but pressure, a pull that dragged the air out of my lungs. The mirror rippled outward and swallowed my reflection whole. For a fraction of a second I saw myself replaced. She now stood where my reflection should be, and I was looking from her side. The world dimmed, the corridor appeared reversed, washed in silver light. I could see her standing outside the mirror, her body moving exactly as mine did, but I couldn't feel my own limbs anymore. She turned her head toward me and smiled. My smile borrowed perfectly. "Don't worry," she whispered, the sound reverberating from everywhere and nowhere. "Someone has to walk the other side." She stepped back, leaving me trapped behind the cold surface. I banged my fists against it, the sound muffled and hollow. My own voice screamed from inside the glass, but out there, she tilted her head and watched with pity. Then she turned and walked away down the corridor, her footsteps echoing softly, perfectly in sync. And when she reached the far end, the mirror froze solid again. The last thing I heard before the world fell silent was a faint whisper behind me from the mirrored hallway that stretched on forever. "Your turn to follow." I woke on the corridor floor just before dawn, the torch flickering weakly beside me. The mirror stood still and grey, no ripples, no figures, just my own frightened reflection blinking back. My throat burned from shouting, my hands shook. But I was outside again. Somehow, I didn't question it. I ran. The dormitory corridors were silent, washed in that blue-grey light before sunrise. I reached my room, slammed the door, and pushed my desk against it. My roommate stirred, startled. "What happened?" she mumbled. I think I passed out," I lied. "I must have hit my head." She didn't press further. She was used to strange noises in this old building, but when she left for her morning class, I noticed she avoided the east corridor entirely. For 2 days, nothing happened. No whispers, no footsteps, no strange movements in the glass. I tried to convince myself I'd hallucinated everything. Exhaustion, stress, suggestion. My logical brain clawed for an explanation, any explanation that would make the world ordinary again. I even returned to the corridor in daylight. The mirror looked harmless. It reflected dust motes, cracked paint, and a tired student too afraid to admit how shaken she was. The only sound was the faint hum of the old lights. By evening, I started to feel almost normal again. I cooked, studied, even played music softly while I worked. But every now and then, I'd catch a flicker at the edge of my vision, a delayed movement in a spoon's reflection, a shimmer in the window pane. I blamed it on paranoia. Then that night, I went to brush my teeth. The bathroom mirror fogged with steam from the hot water, and as I wiped it clear, something inside the glass seemed to lag behind. My hand moved left, but my reflection's hand moved right, mirrored wrong, like a video played backward. I froze. "No," I whispered. "No, not again." A faint knock echoed from behind the glass. 3 slow taps, then a whisper, soft as breath. "You stopped walking." My stomach twisted. I reached for my phone, desperate to film it, to prove to myself it was real. But the screen glitched the moment I opened the camera. Static, then black. The taps grew louder, faster. Knock, 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 knock. The mirror trembled. The reflection tilted its head the wrong way again, smiling faintly, lips parting just enough to speak. But this time, the voice didn't come from behind the glass. It came from the doorway behind me. "Don't look away." I spun around. Nothing. Just the dim corridor, empty and quiet. But when I turned back, the reflection was gone. Only fog. And yet, the footsteps began again. Click, click, click. Moving across the tiles, circling slowly behind me, though there was no one there. I dropped the phone. It clattered across the floor, recording as the footsteps grew louder. Through its tiny microphone, a whisper bled out of the speaker. My own voice, but softer, like it had travelled through water. "Keep walking." Then the lights flickered out. In the darkness, something cold brushed the back of my neck. I ran. I didn't stop until I'd left the building entirely, barefoot, breath steaming in the night air. I collapsed beneath the arch outside, shaking. When I finally dared to look back at the dormitory windows, one on the third floor glowed faintly, the east corridor. In the glass, I saw my reflection waving. I spent the rest of the night outside, sitting under the archway, too afraid to step back into that building. The wind howled around the old stone, carrying faint echoes that could have been voices or just tricks of the architecture. Every time the breeze shifted, I swore I heard footsteps pacing the corridor above me. One set of shoes and one set that was softer, lighter, bare. When dawn finally bled through the mist, I forced myself to move. I couldn't stay out here forever. I packed what little I owned, stuffed the recorder into my coat pocket, and made my way back to the dormitory. The front doors creaked open easily, almost as if the building had been waiting. Inside, everything seemed normal again. Students coming and going, laughter from the cafeteria. Reality, neat and ordinary. But when I passed the staircase leading to the east corridor, the air temperature dropped. The light flickered. My breath came out white. I should have walked away. I should have kept walking straight out of that place and never looked back. But some part of me knew that if I left now, it would follow me. In mirrors, in windows, in any surface that reflected light. So I climbed the stairs one last time. The corridor stretched before me, quiet and endless. The mirror at the far end stood perfectly still, its cracked silver surface glinting faintly in the weak daylight. I pressed record on the device in my pocket. "Last entry," I whispered. "I'm ending this." Each step echoed. Click, click, click. And after the third came another, half a beat behind. She was still there. The hum of the old lights deepened into a low frequency, so deep I could feel it inside my ribs. The sound grew louder, more deliberate, until it resembled breathing. When I reached the midpoint, the mirror shivered. Its surface rippled once, like a pond disturbed by wind. Then her voice came again, closer than ever. A whisper sliding through the air itself. "You took my place." I froze. "What do you mean?" Another ripple, sharper now. My reflection blinked a moment too late, its eyes glassy, its smile wrong. "You left me there," she said. And then the footsteps began. Not behind me this time, but around me, circling in tight spirals. The floorboards groaned, the portraits vibrated in their frames, and the mirror darkened until it became a window into something deeper. Not my reflection, but the same endless mirrored corridor I'd glimpsed that first night. She was in there. The barefoot girl, standing just beyond the surface, hand pressed against the glass. Her eyes locked on mine, pleading, furious. "Walk with me," she whispered. "Please, just one more time." The lights flickered violently. My reflection moved before I did, smiling wider, reaching out. Its palm hit the glass, hard enough to make the mirror quake. The air pressure dropped. My ears popped. The entire corridor began to tilt, as though gravity itself were bending toward the mirror. My feet slid forward involuntarily, shoes scraping the floor. I dug my nails into the wall, the plaster flaking under my hands. "Stop!" I shouted, but the echo that answered was delayed, not my voice, but hers. "Stop!" It was mocking me, or maybe synchronizing. I closed my eyes, forced myself to move backward, fighting the pull. My muscles trembled, the sound of my heartbeat pounded in my ears, matching the rhythm of the phantom steps. Then through the roaring air, I heard something new. Another voice, faint but familiar, my roommate. She was calling my name from somewhere down the stairs. I turned toward her voice, and the pull loosened. The mirror screamed. It was the only word that fits, a shriek of shattering metal and glass, vibrating through the air at a pitch that made my teeth ache. The surface bulged outward like a membrane about to burst. I ran. Behind me, the sound fractured into 1,000 overlapping footsteps, each one echoing faster than the last. I hit the stairwell, tripping down the first few steps as the air behind me collapsed inward with a violent gust. The mirror exploded. Shards flew across the hall like knives, slicing the light into fragments. I covered my head and kept running until I reached the courtyard. Students had gathered outside, staring up at the windows. From the third floor, a cold mist poured from the shattered corridor, seeping into the morning air. Someone asked if I was okay. Someone else was calling for help. I could barely answer. They said later that when the police searched the corridor, there was no body, only fragments of glass, scattered footprints in the dust, and a single, faint recording device lying near the frame of the broken mirror. It had captured just one phrase, repeated over and over in a trembling voice. Mine, though I don't remember saying it. "Keep walking." They never found her. The girl from the mirror, or whatever she was. The university sealed off the entire corridor a week later, claiming structural damage. No one spoke of it again, though everyone whispered. Students transferred out of the dormitory, mirrors were covered with cloth, and the story slipped quietly into the pile of campus myths. I finished my degree elsewhere. I moved cities, changed numbers, deleted recordings, all of them. I even stopped using reflective glass in my home. The windows are frosted, the bathroom mirror removed. I've convinced myself that what happened was an illusion, a fracture of exhaustion and isolation. But lately, the rhythm has returned. It started small, a faint second echo when I walk down the hallway at night, a delayed breath when I speak aloud. Nothing visible, just a presence pacing half a step behind me, patient, waiting. 2 nights ago, I caught a reflection in the kettle. Faint, blurred, but unmistakably human. Her head tilted the wrong way again. Her eyes were mine. I smashed it, of course, the shards scattered across the floor. But in the fractured pieces for a heartbeat, I saw something impossible. Dozens of corridors, stretching endlessly, and a girl walking through each one. And every version of her was watching me. Last night, I woke to the sound of footsteps in my living room. Slow, bare, familiar. I stayed in bed, eyes open, too afraid to move. The floorboards creaked just outside my door. Then a whisper slid through the darkness, close enough to fog the air by my ear. You stopped walking. The handle turned once, and somewhere inside the walls, something glassy breathed. Click, click, click. When I first moved into the flat on Holloway Road, I thought I'd finally escaped the noise of the city. The rent was suspiciously cheap, but I didn't care. The listing had said compact but cozy, which turned out to mean small enough that you could touch both walls if you stretched your arms. Still, it was mine. A private space, a place to be quiet. The first night was peaceful. The neighbors above played no music, the street outside was nearly silent. I lay on my bed, listening to the hum of the radiator, and the faint creak of the floorboards settling. Then I heard it. A slow, drawn-out sigh. Not from me, not from the pipes. From the wall itself. It wasn't imagination. The plaster expanded softly, pushing the air toward me like a chest inflating. And then it exhaled. The sound was steady, organic. In, out, like the room was alive and breathing with me. I told myself it was the wind. But as I turned off the lamp, I realized something else. The rhythm wasn't random. It matched the pace of my own breathing, until I stopped. Then the wall kept breathing alone. I told myself it was nothing more than faulty insulation. Old buildings in London make strange sounds. Air trapped in walls, heating systems sighing through cracks. It had to be that. Still, the sound unnerved me in a way no dripping tap or groaning pipe ever had. There was rhythm to it, awareness. The next morning, I pressed my ear against the plaster. It was cold, slightly damp. Beneath the chill, I could hear a faint whomp, whomp, like a slow heartbeat buried inside the wall. When I tapped the surface, the vibration came back, delayed, softer, as if something was tapping from the other side. I laughed it off. Maybe it was resonance from the underground. The tube line wasn't far. I made tea, opened the window, let the city noise wash over me until it drowned out that quiet, impossible breathing. By the second night, it had grown louder. Every time I turned off the lights, the sound returned. In, out, in, out. So gentle, it almost felt like the room was trying to lull me to sleep. I began to synchronize my breaths with it without meaning to. The walls expanded when I inhaled, contracted when I exhaled. We were breathing together. Then I held my breath to test it. The sound continued, steady, calm. The wall didn't need me anymore. I grabbed my phone, started recording, pressed it against the plaster. Through the speaker, the breathing was clearer, layered, textured, wet. When I boosted the gain, I heard something beneath it. A murmur, a voice, faint, muffled, as though carried through many feet of stone. You fit. Perfectly. I dropped the phone. The sound stopped instantly, the wall going still. My pulse thundered in the silence. I turned on every light in the flat, sat on the floor with my back against the opposite wall, and watched. Nothing moved. No sound, no vibration. Just stillness. Eventually, exhaustion dragged me into shallow sleep. When I woke, the lights were off, though I hadn't turned them off, and the air was warm, almost humid, like being inside someone's breath. The wall behind me rose and fell slowly, brushing the back of my head as it exhaled. Somewhere in the dark, the voice whispered again, close this time, just behind the plaster. "Don't move!" By the third night, I could no longer pretend it was the pipes. The breathing had become part of the flat. A low, rhythmic tide rolling through every wall, every seam, every inch of plaster. It no longer waited for silence. It was there even while I boiled the kettle, while the radio murmured, while I tried to drown it out with music. The air inside the flat grew heavier, moist like a greenhouse. Every surface seemed to sweat faintly, the wallpaper curling at the corners. I kept the window open, but it didn't matter. The sound came from within. I tried to record it again, determined to prove I wasn't losing my mind. The microphone caught everything. A deep inhalation, a slow exhale, and a faint squelch in between, as if the wall had lungs that were struggling to draw breath. When I listened through headphones, I could hear more. Underneath the rhythm, faint, almost hidden, were other sounds. A wet scrape, a heartbeat that wasn't mine. And once, in the gap between breaths, a small gasp like someone waking up. That was when I started measuring. I timed each inhale and exhale with a stopwatch. They averaged 8 seconds apart, the same rate as a resting adult's respiration. The discovery should have calmed me, but instead it made my stomach twist. Because as I tracked the rhythm over hours, the pattern began to change. It started matching me again. If I sped my breathing, the walls followed. If I held my breath, it paused for exactly as long as I did before resuming, slower, heavier. That night I moved my bed to the center of the room, as far from the walls as possible. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, counting the breaths. At some point I drifted off. I woke gasping. The air had grown thick, suffocating, like someone was pressing a hand over my mouth. My sheets clung to me with damp heat. I sat up fast and realized the ceiling above me was moving. It bulged downward, soft and round, rising and falling in perfect time with the sound. When I pressed my hand to it, the plaster gave slightly, warm and elastic beneath my palm. I could feel it breathing. I stumbled toward the door, but the handle was slick, almost slimy. The paint along the frame bubbled faintly, releasing small sighs with every movement. The breathing deepened, filling the flat with a slow, guttural moan. The walls trembled, pulsing inward with each inhale. The air pressure rose until my ears popped, and then between 2 long breaths I heard it again. That voice, no longer faint, no longer behind the plaster. It came from everywhere. "You're inside." The words were followed by a wet chuckle, drawn out and soft. I screamed, slamming my fists into the wall, but instead of the hollow thud of plaster, I felt flesh. The surface was pliant, responsive, twitching under my blows. I backed away, horrified. The wallpaper peeled open along one corner, revealing something dark and red beneath. It wasn't brick, it wasn't wood. It moved. The breathing grew frantic, shallow, panting, catching my terror. And then horribly it stopped altogether. The silence that followed was worse than the sound. In the stillness, the wall seemed to listen. Then slowly it whispered back, the same words I had said moments earlier. "Please, stop." I didn't sleep that night. I couldn't. The silence after the wall mimicked my voice, felt heavier than any sound before it, like a held breath waiting to be released. I sat in the center of the room until dawn, trembling, every muscle locked. When the first light spilled through the window, the walls looked solid again, harmless. But I knew what I'd felt. I knew what had spoken. At sunrise, I packed what I could fit into a single bag and called the landlord. He didn't answer, so I left a message. "Something's wrong with the flat. It's not safe." By noon, a man arrived, middle-aged, red-eyed, smelling faintly of paint thinner. "You're hearing noises?" he asked, already sounding tired. "Not noises," I said. "Breathing." "The walls—" "Ah," he interrupted with a knowing nod. "You're not the first." He walked slowly around the room, pressing a hand against the plaster here and there. His palm lingered on one spot, the same wall where I'd first heard it. "Used to be storage space behind this," he murmured. "Airing shaft for old plumbing, sealed up decades ago." "What's in there now?" He didn't answer. He just smiled faintly, then muttered, "If it bothers you that much, move out." That's what the last tenant did. He left without another word. That evening, I pressed my ear to the same patch he'd touched. The wall was still, cold, but when I whispered, "Who's behind there?" something shifted. A faint ripple under the surface. Then came a slow, deliberate inhale, and this time, the breath wasn't from within the wall. It was right behind me. I spun around. Nothing. Only the dim, yellow glow of the lamp. The curtains swaying gently through the window was closed. I took one step back and froze. The shadow on the wall opposite me wasn't mine. It was larger, taller, its shoulders rising and falling with that slow, familiar rhythm. I moved left. The shadow stayed still. My heartbeat thundered. I lunged for the switch, flooding the room with light. The shadow vanished, but the air remained warm, almost humid, as though the room itself had exhaled relief. Then the floor creaked behind me. The sound wasn't wood. It was wet, elastic, alive. I turned slowly. The wall opposite the bed had begun to bulge outward again. This time, not in a slow, even rhythm, but in short, sharp spasms, like something inside was struggling to get free. I stumbled back. The wallpaper split, tearing down the center. A thick, dark line appeared, then widened. Something behind the plaster was pushing through. I grabbed the nearest object, a chair, and swung. The impact sank into the surface like hitting a soaked mattress. The wall groaned. The tear widened, revealing a glimpse of glistening tissue beneath, pulsing faintly like the inside of a throat. A gush of hot, damp air hit me full in the face. The smell was copper and rot. I gagged, stumbling toward the door, but the handle was gone. The door frame had sealed over, smooth as skin. Panic clawed at me. I pounded the surface, screaming. The walls answered with that same terrible mimicry. My own voice, crying out from every direction, "Let me out! Let me out!" The sound overlapped, grew deeper, became laughter, wet, bubbling, impossible laughter that filled the room until the floor itself began to pulse. I fell to my knees. The ceiling rippled like a lung at full inhale, then collapsed downward, forcing me to the floor. The light bulb popped, plunging everything into darkness. In the pitch black, I could hear it. The real breathing, close, intimate, steady. Right beside my ear, a voice whispered, soft and wet, "You're part of it now." I must have blacked out because when I opened my eyes again, the room was still. Sunlight leaked through the curtains, pale and weak. The air smelled of plaster dust and something faintly metallic. My throat hurt, my palms stung, and for a moment I couldn't remember why. Then I saw the wall. It was perfect, smooth, repainted, no tear, no bulge, no trace of the soft, heaving tissue I'd seen the night before. I stumbled backward, heart hammering. It couldn't have repaired itself, not overnight. My knuckles still ached from striking it. But when I touched the surface, the plaster was solid and cold, like nothing had ever happened. The door stood open. I don't remember opening it. Outside, the hallway was quiet. I ran downstairs to the street, desperate for air. The city was loud again, mercifully human. Buses, chatter, dogs, the chaos I had missed. For the first time in weeks, I cried. A neighbor, an older woman who lived 2 floors down, found me sitting on the steps. "You look pale, love," she said gently. "Rough night?" I nodded. Something strange happened in my flat. Her smile faltered. "Oh, you're in number 7, aren't you?" "Yes." She hesitated, glancing toward my window. "That one always feels close. Like there's not enough space between the walls, you know." She lowered her voice. "They sealed off a room years ago before I moved in. Said it wasn't safe. Sometimes I think it's still there, behind that wall of yours." I wanted to ask more, but she patted my hand and walked away before I could. When I returned upstairs, everything seemed almost normal again. The air was dry, the light steady. I even managed to laugh at myself, a nervous, exhausted laugh, the kind that belongs to someone who's survived a bad dream. I cleaned, opened the window wide, made tea. For the first time in days, I sat at my desk without feeling watched. As evening fell, I began to believe that whatever had happened was some kind of breakdown. The mind can fold in on itself when it's starved of sleep. Maybe the walls never moved. Maybe I had imagined it all. I wrote a note to my landlord, apologizing for the earlier panic, and placed it by the door. Then I took a long shower. The water was hot, steady, grounding. I closed my eyes and let the sound drown everything else. And that's when I realized something strange. The steam wasn't rising straight upward. It was being drawn toward the wall and curling into faint spirals before vanishing through the cracks in the tile. I pressed my palm against the shower wall. Warm. Too warm. Then the tiles beneath my hand shifted. Not cracked. Moved, like the surface of skin under breath. A soft exhale brushed across my wrist, and a faint voice slipped through the thin gap in the tiles, calm and close. You came back. I stumbled out, dripping, heart slamming in my chest. The mirror over the sink was fogged, but something darker shimmered behind the mist. Not my reflection, but the vague outline of a face, eyes open, breathing softly against the glass. When I wiped it clear, the image was gone. The bathroom was quiet. But from the other room came a sound I recognized all too well. In, out, in, out. The walls had begun breathing again, slow, steady, patient, as though the flat itself had been holding its breath, waiting for me to return. I didn't even bother to dry off. I grabbed my bag, my phone, and my keys. Or tried to. The keys were gone. I must have dropped them, but I couldn't remember when. The sound from the other room deepened, slow and wet, vibrating through the floorboards like a living pulse. I told myself, just leave, break the lock if you have to. But when I reached for the door, the handle twitched beneath my hand. Not locked, breathing. The metal was warm, soft, almost pliant. As I pulled, it pulsed once, and something beneath the surface sighed. I stumbled backward, heart in my throat. The walls around me began to shift, the plaster rippling as though stirred by wind. But there was no draft. The window was closed, sealed tight. My breath misted in the rising heat. The room inhaled. I ran to the window, desperate, clawing at the latch. It wouldn't move. Condensation spread across the glass like a heartbeat, pulsing with each out that filled the air. Then I noticed the noise had changed. It wasn't one breath anymore. There were two, mine and something else. I turned slowly toward the center of the room. The bulge in the wall was back, huge this time, swelling outward like a balloon. The wallpaper stretched, splitting at the seams. Beneath the tear was something dark, slick and red. It shivered, inhaled, then exhaled a wave of humid air that smelled like rust and decay. It was alive. The voice came again, no longer muffled, no longer behind the plaster. It came from the very air around me. You breathe so beautifully. The floorboards rippled under my feet. The rhythm of the breaths quickened, syncing with my heartbeat. I felt light-headed, dizzy. Every inhale I took seemed to draw air, not from my lungs, but from the walls themselves. I screamed a raw, animal sound and grabbed the nearest object, the metal lamp, from my desk. I swung it into the wall. The surface dented, caved inward, but the room moaned, not from the impact, from pain. The ceiling above me throbbed, the plaster sagging like muscle. The sound became desperate, shallow, in, out, as if the room were hyperventilating. Then the voice changed. It no longer whispered. It begged, "Don't leave me. Don't stop. We need you." The words overlapped, layering into a chorus that filled every inch of space. I dropped the lamp, covering my ears, but the sound wasn't in my ears anymore. It was inside me, vibrating through my ribs, threading itself into my pulse. I staggered to the kitchen, searching for anything sharp. My hand landed on a knife. I pressed it to the wall, trembling. "Let me go!" I screamed. The wall pulsed once more, and a dozen hand-shaped impressions bloomed under the surface, pushing outward from within. Their fingers traced the edges of the blade, caressing it, guiding my hand away. Then softly, almost tenderly, "We only breathe when you do." I snapped. I drove the knife into the wall with all my strength. It didn't hit plaster, it hit something soft. A gush of warm, thick liquid spilled out, coating my hand. The room convulsed, a massive inhale that sucked the air from my lungs. The lights flickered violently, the floor shook, the breath became a scream. I ripped the knife free, gasping, stumbling toward the window. The wall bulged again, even this time from above, below, all sides. Faces pressed outward, mouths open, gasping soundlessly. With every breath I took, they swelled. With every exhale, they shrank. And then I understood. The room wasn't breathing with me, it was breathing through me. I hurled the chair through the window. The glass shattered outward, flooding the room with cold night air. I climbed onto the sill, coughing, my lungs burning. The pressure behind me surged like a storm. "Stay!" The voice was no longer soft, it was thunderous, angry. "We can't breathe without you!" I leapt. The world went white. Air, wind, gravity. Before I hit the pavement 2 stories below. Pain exploded through my body, but I was alive. I dragged myself away from the building, crawling until I reached the opposite side of the street. Behind me, the window glowed faintly, breathing one last slow inhale before going still. The flat was silent. For the first time in weeks, I couldn't hear it anymore. I lay there in the cold until dawn, unable to move, staring up at the dark windows. When the ambulance came, the paramedics asked what had happened. "I fell," I told them. It was easier than the truth. They nodded, lifting me onto the stretcher. As they did, the air shifted again, a faint warmth brushing my face like a final sigh. And somewhere in the walls of that building, faint but real, came one last whisper. "Don't forget to breathe." The hospital was bright and cold, too clean to feel real. The doctors said I'd broken 2 ribs and suffered a concussion. They asked how I'd fallen, but my mind was foggy, and every time I tried to explain, the words tangled. Breathing hurt, each inhale sharp and heavy. They kept me overnight for observation. Machines surrounded my bed, heart monitor, oxygen, the soft hiss of a ventilator. For a while the beeping comforted me. It was mechanical, predictable, human, until it wasn't. At some point near midnight I noticed the rhythm of the monitor had changed. Beep, beep, pause. Then another softer tone joined it. A low, organic whomp, whomp under my ribs, too slow to be mine. The nurse came in, adjusting the IV. "You're breathing fine," she said with a smile. "The machine's picking up some interference, that's all." Interference. After she left, I watched the monitor. The waveform pulsed steadily, matching my breathing for a while, then slipped out of sync. The second pattern grew stronger. It inhaled when I exhaled when I held my breath. I pressed the call button, but the intercom hissed instead of answering. A faint voice whispered through the static. Calm, wet, familiar. "We told you. I can't breathe without you." The ventilator surged, the hose tightening around my arm like a pulse. The rhythm grew louder, faster, until I couldn't tell which breath was mine and which belonged to something else. The heart monitor spiked, the room filled with the sound of in, out, in, out. And just before everything went still, I heard one last sigh, deep, contented. And the wall behind my hospital bed rose and fell once, slowly, breathing. They said it would let us hear life itself. A machine that could translate the movement of blood, every pulse, every vein, every microscopic surge of oxygen into sound. I was part of the research team that built it. We called it the hemograph, a wearable neural interface that recorded vascular vibration and amplified it through a microchip embedded near the carotid artery. It wasn't meant for horror. It was meant for medicine. When we activated the first prototype, the room filled with an astonishing noise, not chaotic, but symphonic. 1,000 overlapping currents rushing through our bodies like rivers beneath skin. Every heartbeat, every twitch, every breath had its own melody. But there was something else hidden in the sound. A deeper layer, faint, deliberate. A rhythm that didn't match any known bodily function. It pulsed slowly thrice per minute, too deep for a human heart. When we filtered it out, the software glitched, refusing to silence it. The machine insisted on playing it, a low murmur beneath our blood, and somehow it was changing tempo, syncing with the way we listened. At first, we dismissed it as feedback, electromagnetic noise from the neural interface, maybe crosstalk from the room's wiring. The hemograph was sensitive enough to pick up muscle tremors from across the body, so a little static was nothing unusual. But that low pulse, it never went away. No matter whose body we attached the device to, man, woman, young, old, the same rhythm appeared, always the same tempo, the same pressure, 3 beats per minute. We joked about it. Someone called it the hidden metronome. Another said it was the Earth's heartbeat. It helped to laugh. Laughter was easier than admitting we'd built something that heard more than we understood. My colleague, Dr. Voss, decided to run an isolation test. We moved the equipment into a shielded lab with no wireless signals, no power cables in the walls, nothing that could interfere. He volunteered to be the subject. I attached the neural pads around his neck, calibrated the sensors, and pressed record. The sound came instantly, not a heartbeat, a voice, faint, slow, drawn out through the vascular noise like breath moving through a flute. Thrum, thrum, thrum. The signal wavered with his pulse, each syllable vibrating in the blood itself. "You hear that?" I whispered. Voss nodded, pale. His fingers twitched. It's inside. Not in my ears. I mean, in my veins, the pitch began to climb, so gradually I almost didn't notice. The waveform on the monitor stretched upward, shifting from low red to bright white. I reached for the kill switch, but the sound cut out before I touched it, as if it knew. Voss gasped, clutching his throat. The veins in his neck bulged slightly, pulsing in uneven rhythm. Then, just as suddenly, the pattern stabilized. "It's gone," he said, forcing a shaky laugh. "Must have been a resonant spike." I wanted to believe him, but the monitor still displayed the signal. The line wasn't flat. It had become smoother, steadier. It was still there. That night I lay in bed replaying the recordings. I isolated each frequency until I reached the bass tone, the metronome. I expected to hear that same 3-beat rhythm. Instead, I heard words forming beneath it. Faint, layered, wet. Keep listening. My skin went cold. I deleted the file and shut my laptop. But from somewhere in the quiet of my flat, I still heard it. The low thrum, 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 echoing faintly from inside my own chest. By the end of the week, every member of the team admitted they could still hear it. That low, wet thrum that seemed to follow us home. We stopped laughing about the Earth's heartbeat. It had become constant, intrusive, something between sound and sensation. I started recording at night, hoping to prove it was in the environment. But when I played the files back, they were silent, dead air. Yet I could remember hearing it while the recorder ran. That was when I realized the sound wasn't entering the ears, it was generated from within. Voss was the first to show physical symptoms. He complained of pressure in his skull and a metallic taste in his mouth. When he turned his head, A faint rushing noise accompanied the movement, like waves against a rock. One morning, he arrived at the lab with blood on his collar. "It came from my nose," he said, trembling. "And it wasn't red, it was darker, thicker." I tried to convince him to see a doctor, but he refused. "It's part of the process," he said. "The sound's tuning us." The next night, I woke to the same sensation. The faint vibration of blood moving under my skin. The sound of liquid flowing with purpose. I pressed my ear against my wrist, and for the first time, I heard it clearly. It wasn't a pulse. It was rhythm, structured, intelligent. I stumbled to my desk, set up the hemograph, and pressed the sensor patch against my neck. The screen came alive in a heartbeat, flooding with shifting frequencies. The signal was stronger than before, no longer 3 beats per minute, but faster, matching my excitement. The speakers crackled. Something inside the bloodline screamed through the noise, not human, but almost forming words. "Hear us." The room shook, my vision blurred. The veins along my arms stood out like blue cords, pulsing in time with the noise. I ripped off the patch, gasping, but the sound didn't stop. It was still inside me, a whisper running through every vessel, deeper with every beat. I called Voss in panic. His phone picked up on the first ring, but he didn't speak. All I could hear on the other end was the same sound, amplified, thrum, 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 and underneath it, wet laughter. I hung up, shaking. When I looked at my reflection in the mirror, I saw movement under my skin. Tiny ripples along my neck and jaw, as if something beneath the surface was swimming through my veins. I pressed a finger to my throat. The pulse jumped violently beneath my touch. Then it responded. A second pulse, faint but deliberate, thudded back against my fingertip, out of sync with my own heartbeat. For the first time, I realized the truth. The sound wasn't just inside us, it was using us. Every beat, every drop of blood was a transmission, like a signal spreading cell by cell. And now it was awake. I didn't go back to the lab the next day. I couldn't. Every time I closed my eyes, I felt movement. Subtle ripples beneath my skin, as though my veins had become small rivers carrying something that wasn't blood anymore. Still, I needed answers. So I broke in that night. The lab was empty, silent, except for the faint hum of the refrigeration units. The hemograph terminal still glowed faintly, running automated data capture. I checked the records. The system had been active for 36 hours straight. Voss had never stopped recording. The log displayed continuous waveform data, hundreds of overlapping tracks. But one stood out. The same deep rhythm as before, except now it was steady, powerful, relentless, a perfect 60 beats per minute, my heart rate. I scrolled through the file. Every 30 seconds the pattern changed, the peaks rising and falling like breaths. Then, buried in the frequencies, came something new. Speech. A phrase repeated over and over, stretched and distorted. "We are your current." The voice was liquid, reverberating as though spoken through fluid. A low moan echoed from the far side of the lab. I froze. The sound came from the testing chamber. Inside, under the pale fluorescent light, stood Voss. His back was turned, his white coat soaked dark down the spine. He was connected to the main hemograph array by dozens of cables running into his neck and arms. The machine hissed softly, pumping rhythmically, in time with the thrum that filled the air. "Voss," I whispered. He turned slowly. His eyes were bloodshot, veins black against his skin. His lips moved before any sound emerged. When it did, it wasn't his voice. It listens through us. The words vibrated more than they spoke. His throat bulged as something moved beneath the skin. I took a step back, bile rising in my throat. "What did you do?" He smiled weakly, eyes glassy with something like awe. "It's beautiful," he whispered. "It's been here all along, in the blood, waiting for someone to listen." The machines began to whine, their levels spiking. I could see the pressure in the tubes. Thick, dark fluid pumping through them. Not blood, something heavier. Voss convulsed. His body arched backward, cables tearing free with wet snaps. The noise became deafening, a single tone, deep and alive. He collapsed, twitching, then silence. I rushed to him, kneeling beside the body. His chest rose once, shuddered, and stopped. I reached for a pulse. Nothing. And then faintly under my fingers, thrum. I jerked my hand back. His veins pulsed once more, a beat delayed from mine. The floor beneath me trembled as the sound spread outward through the concrete, crawling up the walls, humming through the lights. The machine behind me flickered. The waveform changed shape, forming letters on the screen. Transmission stable. The cables snaked across the floor like veins, winding toward me. I ran. By the time I reached the exit, every surface of the lab was vibrating. The walls, the doors, even the air itself. My own pulse thundered in my ears, syncing perfectly with the noise. When I burst into the night, I expected silence. Instead, I heard it again. Faint but unmistakable, coming not from the lab, but from within me. Thrum, thrum, thrum. And beneath it, a whisper in my own voice. We are your current. I didn't remember driving home. One moment I was running through the car park, heart hammering in sync with that awful pulse. The next, I was sitting in my flat, staring at my hands as dawn bled through the curtains. My palms were red, not with blood, but with a faint, metallic shimmer like copper dust that refused to wash off. I told myself I was in shock, that the sound in my veins was just adrenaline, trauma, exhaustion. It had to be. For the next 2 days, I avoided sleep. I sealed the hermograph prototypes in a metal box, wrapped them in aluminium foil, shoved them under the sink, as if distance or shielding could undo what had already entered my bloodstream. The thrum lessened, eventually fading into something I could almost ignore. My heartbeat became my own again, irregular, human, comforting in its imperfection. I thought maybe it was over. I even went outside. The sun felt warm for the first time in weeks. I met an old colleague for coffee, forced myself to talk about ordinary things. Weather, rent, football, anything but the lab. For a while, I managed to forget. But when I reached for my cup, she frowned. "You've cut yourself," she said. I looked down. There was a small slit along my wrist, almost invisible. No blood flowed, just a faint shimmer, that same copper hue glinting under the cafe light. I wiped it with a napkin. The fabric hissed as though steam had touched it and left a thin red stain shaped like a fingerprint. That night, the sound returned. It began in my jaw, a low vibration that traveled down my neck and into my chest. I lay perfectly still, listening. The rhythm was wrong again, too slow, too deliberate. I pressed a stethoscope against my ribs. The noise was clearer now, no longer a faint hum. It was words. We flow. You carry. I threw the stethoscope across the room, heart pounding. My phone lit up on the desk, though I hadn't touched it. The screen displayed a waveform. The caption read, "Transmission in progress." "No," I whispered, reaching for it. The speaker emitted a wet hiss, like fluid rushing through pipes. Then came my own voice, distorted, layered, speaking in perfect rhythm with my pulse. You are the conduit. The phone went dark. I ran to the sink, seized a kitchen knife and pressed it against the inside of my arm. My skin trembled beneath the blade. I just wanted to see, to prove that there was nothing living beneath it. The first cut was shallow, no blood, only a thin stream of red-tinged liquid that glowed faintly under the light. It pulsed once, twice, and then retracted, sliding back beneath the skin as if drawn inward by invisible suction. The pain hit a moment later, searing, electric. I dropped the knife. The wound sealed itself within seconds, leaving no scar. Only a faint, circular mark that pulsed in rhythm with the sound. I collapsed to the floor, sobbing. My reflection in the metal of the sink shimmered faintly, eyes glowing with that same dull copper light. Then beneath the ringing in my ears, I heard a voice I hadn't heard since the lab.
"Voss, don't fight it," he whispered, his tone distant, echoing. "It's not infection. It's evolution," I screamed, grabbing the nearest object, my old field recorder, and hurled it at the sink. It shattered, fragments scattering across the tiles. For a moment, there was silence again. Blessed, ordinary silence. Then, from the broken recorder, a faint, rhythmic thrum began to play. Steady, alive, and unmistakably mine. By the next morning, I knew there was no going back. The pulse inside me had stopped feeling like a heartbeat. It was something else now, constant, measured, purposeful. The kind of rhythm a machine would keep. I didn't eat, I didn't drink. Every time I tried, I could feel it. The sound, adjusting, adapting, absorbing the energy I gave it. My blood no longer belonged to me. It had become listening tissue. I decided to end it. I went back to the lab. It was sealed off, the door padlocked, a warning sign plastered across it. "Biohazard, do not enter." Someone had called the authorities after the incident with Voss, but by then the building had already been abandoned. The silence inside was worse than the noise I carried. It felt empty, hollowed out, as though something had drained every sound from the space. I found the main hemograph unit still where I had left it, connected to half-melted power lines. The screens were cracked, but one still flickered faintly. The software was running, though no one had touched it in days. The words on the monitor pulsed in rhythm with my veins. Signal active. Host 002, me. I sank to my knees. "You want out?" I whispered. "Don't you?" The speakers crackled, and for the first time, the voice answered without distortion. It was calm, familiar. "You invited us. You opened the current. We are what flows between." I stared at the waveform dancing across the screen. It shimmered like liquid light, pulsing faster now. My body began to respond. The veins in my arms rose beneath the skin, luminous and faintly golden. "You can't survive outside," I said, gripping the edge of the table. "You need blood. You need you." The tone deepened. The cables along the floor began to tremble, vibrating with pressure. My pulse quickened, matching it until my chest felt ready to burst. I realized the machine wasn't just amplifying the sound anymore, it was transmitting it. Whatever was inside me was trying to send itself outward. I staggered toward the main terminal and slammed the emergency breaker. The lights flickered, dimmed, but the machine stayed alive, humming with power it shouldn't have. The sound intensified. It filled the room, thick and wet, a chorus of heartbeats layered atop one another until it became a single, living tone. And then came the scream. It erupted not from the speakers, but from the walls themselves, a metallic shriek that vibrated the air so violently the glass windows shattered inward. I fell, clutching my ears. Blood streamed between my fingers, hot and glowing faintly under the emergency lights. Through the noise, I saw movement, dark shapes forming within the mist of shattered glass, flickering like silhouettes made of fluid. Faces pressed outward from the smoke, mouths moving in unison with the voice. We flow. We join. We live through you. The hemograph cables began to crawl across the floor toward me. I tried to back away, but they moved faster, metallic veins writhing like serpents. One wrapped around my wrist, burning through my skin as it attached itself to the pulse beneath. Instantly, my body lit up from the inside, arteries glowing like circuits. My heartbeat was no longer my own. I screamed, tearing at the cable, but it had fused with me. My blood rushed into the machine, turning its internal lights a deep, shimmering crimson. Then, all at once, the sound stopped. The silence hit like impact. My vision blurred, and for a moment, I thought I was dead. But the room hadn't gone still, only changed. The hum was gone, replaced by a faint static whisper. The waveform on the screen slowed, flattening until only one word remained. Transfer complete. The cable detached. My body slumped to the floor, trembling. The machine was silent. I crawled to my knees, panting, staring at the screen. The faint glow inside the hemograph pulsed once, twice, then steady. Something inside it was alive. A voice, faint, broken, echoed through the speakers. My voice! We are your current! I stumbled backward, desperate to escape. The walls of the lab shimmered faintly as the sound returned. Not loud, but vast. It spread outward, rolling through the floor, the air, the ground itself. Outside, streetlights flickered in time with my pulse. Power lines hummed with the same rhythm. The signal had found a new bloodstream, not just mine, everyone's.
I ran into the street screaming for help, but no one reacted. They all stood still, eyes blank, swaying gently to an inaudible rhythm. I clutched my chest, feeling it again, thrum, thrum, thrum. And then I understood. It had never wanted to leave me. It had wanted to multiply. I don't know how far the signal spread. Maybe it never needed distance at all. Maybe it just needed contact. Blood connects everything. The touch of one pulse to another, a handshake, a wound, a heartbeat overheard. In the days that followed, the city changed. Quietly at first. People began moving in rhythm. Subtle things, unnoticeable if you didn't know what to look for. The barista's hand tapping the counter. The joggers pacing in perfect synchrony. The flicker of streetlights that rose and fell like breathing. Everywhere I went, the same frequency vibrated beneath the noise of life, a low, patient thrum that lived just below hearing. I stopped sleeping. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the waveform of my own pulse stretched across the inside of my eyelids. It whispered in time with the blood moving behind them. We flow. We join. We lived through you. I left the city, thinking maybe it would fade if I put enough distance between myself and the network of bodies. I drove until the motorway vanished into fields. No buildings, no people, just open air. For a few hours I thought I was free. The sound dimmed, my pulse my own again. Then I noticed the radio. It was off, but the speaker grill was vibrating, the same slow beat, thrum, thrum, thrum. The steering wheel trembled beneath my hands. The veins on my wrist glowed faintly in the dark, lighting the cabin with soft copper light. The engine stalled. Silence. Then from the radio, my voice, layered and wet, speaking with absolute calm. You carried us well. The car door locked. The static filled the air, deep and alive. My reflection in the window smiled faintly, and from somewhere inside the wires the current whispered one last phrase, steady as blood moving through the heart of the world. Transmission complete. There's a forest on the northern ridge where no one goes after dark, no paths, no signs, no birds. Just silence, the kind that hums in your ears until you start hearing things that aren't really there. I went there because of my brother. He disappeared 6 months ago while surveying soil for a wind farm. They found his GPS unit tangled in roots near the tree line, but no footprints beyond that point. The data on his device stopped recording at exactly 2:14 a.m. He'd left me a single voicemail before vanishing, just breathing, slow, uneven, and then a whisper that didn't sound like him at all. The forest remembers. I tried to ignore it, but that phrase kept looping in my head like a broken song. So last night, I drove north. I parked where the road ended and stepped into the trees. The air was unnaturally still. The moonlight filtered through mist that moved like smoke. And then I heard it, a sound that shouldn't have existed in a place so quiet. A faint murmur rolling between the trunks like distant voices buried underground. And one of them was saying my name. At first I thought it was the wind. The way air weaves through pine needles can mimic whispers if you're tired enough, if your nerves are stretched just right. That's what I told myself, clutching my flashlight a little tighter. But the trees weren't moving. The air was perfectly still. The murmuring came in waves, rising and falling like breath, but never carried by any breeze. I turned in a slow circle, trying to pinpoint its source, but it seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. Michael. My name, again. The voice was faint, genderless, thin as paper. I swept my torch across the trees. The beam caught on rough bark, damp moss, nothing unusual. And yet every time I moved forward, the voice seemed to shift, just ahead of me, always a few steps deeper into the woods. I told myself to stop, to turn back before I got lost. But then I saw it, a marking, etched into the trunk of an old birch, my brother's initials, J.D. The lines were fresh, the wood still pale beneath the torn bark. My breath hitched. James! The whisper came again, closer this time, threading through the trees. Keep walking. I did. Each step seemed to sink deeper into the earth. The ground was soft, spongy, as if I were walking on a buried layer of leaves that never decayed. The deeper I went, the stronger the murmuring grew. No longer one voice, but dozens, overlapping, whispering words I couldn't fully catch. Then the forest changed. The air thickened, heavier, harder to breathe. My flashlight beam flickered, not from the battery, but because the light itself seemed to struggle against the darkness. The trees stood unnaturally straight, perfectly spaced, like ribs of some colossal body. When I stopped, the murmuring stopped too. For the first time, there was absolute silence. Not even my own heartbeat. And then the ground beneath my boots exhaled. A long, hollow sigh rolled through the soil, bending the grass outward like a breath passing beneath it. I fell backward, scrambling for balance. The earth pulsed once, as if something deep below had shifted. My flashlight flickered back to life, and I saw them, faces, dozens of them, pale, stretched across the roots like bark grown over skin. Their eyes were shut, their mouths open just enough to release that impossible whisper. Remember us? The light sputtered out, and the last thing I felt before everything went dark was a warm breath against my ear, familiar, human, and horribly gentle. You finally came back. When I came to, the forest was quieter than before, not silent, just listening. The air felt different, thick with that faint hum you hear when standing beside an electric fence. I blinked until my eyes adjusted. My torch lay a few feet away, its beam cutting a thin line across the ground. The faces were gone. The roots were just roots again. I tried to laugh, but the sound caught in my throat. My pulse echoed in my ears, and for one surreal moment, I couldn't tell if it was mine. It was slower, steadier. Not a heartbeat, more like a rhythm. Then I heard it again. Michael. This time, it didn't sound like the wind or the forest. It sounded like it came from inside my head, vibrating behind my temples. The whisper was layered, hundreds of faint voices blending into one tone. I grabbed the torch and stumbled deeper into the trees, chasing the sound like a moth to light. The forest floor sloped downward, damp with a thin film of mist that clung to my boots. The deeper I went, the louder the murmurs became, now forming fragments of sentences, some human, some warped beyond recognition. He remembered. She's still waiting. Breathe with us. Every tree I passed seemed to move slightly when I wasn't looking. Their trunks curved inward, subtle at first, until they began leaning toward me. The sound of the wood creaking was rhythmic, sung, crack, groan, crack, keeping time with the whispers. I switched on my recorder. The LED blinked red, steady. I spoke aloud, my voice shaking. This is Michael Drew, day one of the search for my brother James. I've followed auditory anomalies to coordinates 53.811 by -2.176. Possible environmental interference. My words cut off, because through the headphones I could hear it again, but this time behind my voice. A second recording. Not an echo, not feedback, a delay. I spoke again, testing audio response. Half a second later my voice came back. Distorted, deeper, spoken by someone else. Testing audio response. I dropped the recorder. The playback continued even after it hit the ground. The voice went on, unprompted. You followed him here? You shouldn't have. The trees groaned louder. The light of my torch flickered, the beams scattering across a cluster of roots ahead. Something was tangled there, fabric. I knelt, shaking, and pulled it free. A torn jacket. James's. The same one he'd been wearing when he vanished. It was damp, but warm, as though it had only been lost for minutes, not months. That was when I noticed the ground. It was pulsing, small ripples moving outward like water disturbed by rain. Beneath my boots the soil felt alive, flexing faintly with each throb, and underneath that, buried deep, came the unmistakable sound of breathing, slow, ancient, massive. The trees swayed as though stirred by the same lungs that moved the ground. The whispering rose, frantic now, layered with 1,000 overlapping voices, and through them all I heard James again, faint but clear. Don't let it remember you. Then, from somewhere in the dark, behind me, a single footstep broke the rhythm, deliberate, heavy, wet, followed by another. And another. Whatever was walking there wasn't alone. The footsteps didn't sound like anything human. Each one landed with a damp, sinking weight, as if something heavy was pressing into the soil, drawing it upward, then letting it collapse back with a soft squelch. I turned off my torch instinctively, holding my breath crouching low. The forest pulsed, that slow, breathing rhythm. In, out, surrounded me. It came not from one place, but from everywhere. The trees, the earth, even the mist seemed to rise and fall in synchrony. Then the footsteps stopped. I listened. Frozen, I could still hear the whispers, hundreds of voices layered into one long exhalation. Remember, remember, remember. A crack split the darkness, the sound of wood tearing. My pulse jumped. I shone the torch. The tree trunk ahead of me was splitting down the middle, bark peeling open like flesh. Sap oozed out, thick and dark, steaming faintly in the cold air. But when the light hit it, it wasn't sap. It was blood.
Human blood. Something moved inside the opening. A pale hand pressing outward through the wound in the tree. The fingers trembled, then curled against the bark. I stumbled backward, tripping over a root. The flashlight slipped from my hand and spun on the ground, the beam slicing across the forest in frantic arcs. That's when I saw them. Bodies, half buried in the earth, their faces tilted upward, mouths open. They weren't corpses, not exactly. They were growing out of the ground, roots threaded through their necks, their chests, their eyes. With every slow inhale of the forest, their torsos lifted slightly, as though sharing the same breath, and then they exhaled, releasing that endless whisper. Remember, I tried to run, but the earth beneath my boots wasn't solid anymore. It flexed like muscle, sucking at my feet. My recorder lay a few steps away, still flashing red, the distorted playback played on. He went below. It remembers everyone who listens. I force myself forward, crawling toward it, dragging my legs free from the pulsing ground. My hand brushed the recorder just as the whispering stopped. Silence. Then from right behind me, a single voice. Clear, human, trembling. Michael! I froze. That voice, I'd know it anywhere. I turned slowly. James stood there, what was left of him. His face was pale, skin marked with dark veins that ran down into the collar of his torn jacket. His eyes were black, pupils wide and reflective, swallowing the light. James! My voice cracked. You're alive? He shook his head slowly. When he spoke, his tone came out doubled. One voice, his, another older, deeper, carried underneath. I tried to leave. It doesn't let go. I took a step closer, but he flinched. The ground beneath him rippled, roots rising like tendrils around his ankles. You have to go, he whispered. It's listening through me now. The trees groaned. The soil bulged. Something vast and unseen moved beneath us, shifting like a creature turning in its sleep. The air grew hot, thick with the stench of rot and sap. I can't leave without you, I said. I came here to find you. He looked at me with hollow pity. Then you've already been found. Before I could speak, he staggered forward and pressed something into my hand, a small metal object, warm to the touch. His voice cracked. Don't let it say your name. Then he screamed, a guttural sound that wasn't entirely human. His body arched backward, veins bulging, skin splitting along his arms. Roots erupted from his flesh, dragging him down into the earth. James! I shouted, reaching for him. My fingers caught only soil. The ground sealed over him with a wet, sucking noise. And then the forest breathed in. The whisper returned, louder now, united. Remember? Every tree leaned toward me at once, and the earth spoke in my brother's voice. You finally do. I don't remember running. I only remember fleeing. Branches clawed at my coat as I tore through the undergrowth, half blind with tears, choking on the smell of soil and sap and blood. The whispering followed me. Not from behind, but from within the trees themselves. Every trunk I passed exhaled my name in fragments. When I finally stumbled out onto a clearing, the air was still. No sound, no breath, no heartbeat. Nothing but the slow creak of cooling wood behind me. The clearing was circular, ringed with birch trees so pale they almost glowed. At its centre stood a shallow pool, black and glassy, perfectly still. My reflection stared up at me, trembling in the water. I fell to my knees, gasping. James! The name hung in the air like a sin. I looked down. My reflection wasn't moving the way it should. It blinked slower. Its chest didn't rise when I breathed. The surface rippled faintly, but not from wind, from beneath. Something inside the water exhaled. A plume of mist rolled upward, brushing my face. Warm, damp, familiar. For a moment it smelled like home, my brother's cologne, our mother's soap, the soil from the garden where we used to play. Then it was gone. The pool began to tremble, the reflection breaking apart into scattered fragments of light. I stumbled back. A voice whispered from the depths. Soft, sorrowful. You remember him? That's enough. My hand brushed against something in my pocket. The metal object James had given me. I pulled it out. A compass, old and cracked. The needle trembling wildly, though there was no wind. When I held it over the pool, the needle spun faster, clicking with an irregular rhythm, like teeth chattering. The sound was faint but distinct. A pulse. In, out, in, out. And then the forest joined in. The trees surrounding the clearing leaned inward as one, their branches swaying without wind, their trunks creaking in perfect synchrony. The rhythm spread through the air like a living heartbeat, the same cadence I'd heard beneath the ground.
I clutched the compass to my chest. "You're not real," I whispered. "None of this is real." But the forest disagreed. A voice rose above the rest, clearer, louder, carried by the wind that wasn't there. "Then why do we remember you?" The pool darkened. Faces surfaced within it. Dozens, maybe hundreds, each one distorted as if stretched beneath ice. I saw James among them, his mouth open, eyes wide, caught mid-breath. "No," I whispered, backing away. The compass slipped from my hand. The instant it hit the ground, the forest fell silent again. I stood there shaking, half expecting the trees to move, the water to reach for me, but nothing did. The forest was still, calm, almost peaceful. I waited minutes, maybe hours, before daring to move. When I finally picked up the compass, the needle had stopped spinning. It pointed east, back the way I'd come. The whispers were gone. The ground no longer pulsed. I thought maybe I'd done it, that the nightmare had passed, that whatever had claimed my brother had released me. For the first time since entering the forest, I felt the weight of exhaustion. The air was cool, the night sky clear. I could almost convince myself that everything, the faces, the blood, the breathing, had been a fever dream born of grief. So I followed the compass. Step by step, eastward, until I saw a faint orange glow between the trees. The headlights of my car waiting on the distant road. I laughed, half mad, half relieved. The sound of my own voice startled me. I was free. I was alive. But then the compass in my hand began to tremble again. The needle clicked softly against the glass, and when I looked closer, I realized it wasn't pointing east anymore. It was pointing behind me. And from deep within the forest I had just escaped, 1,000 voices whispered together, perfectly in sync. "Don't forget to remember." The whisper rolled through the forest like a wave. It wasn't loud, but it didn't need to be. It was everywhere. Between the branches, beneath the soil, woven through the air I breathed. My body froze, every instinct screaming to run, but my legs wouldn't move. The compass in my hand vibrated violently, the needle spinning so fast it blurred. Then it stopped, pointing straight down. I knelt, hesitating. The ground looked ordinary. Damp leaves, old roots, patches of moss, but the soil beneath shifted faintly as if stirred from below. I brushed it aside with trembling hands. Something metallic glinted beneath the dirt. A second compass, identical to mine. My stomach turned cold. James had carried only one. The whispering began again, closer this time. "He left it for you. You followed. You became." I backed away, clutching the compass to my chest. The trees around the clearing were moving again, bending inward. Their trunks groaned under invisible weight, bark cracking as though forced into motion by something deeper. And then I heard it. The breathing, no longer subtle, no longer hidden. The whole forest inhaled. The air rushed inward, pulling leaves, mist, sound. Me. I stumbled as the suction gripped my chest, dragging me toward the pool. The water shimmered faintly in the darkness, expanding outward like a lung. The faces beneath the surface shifted, mouths opening. I dug my hands into the soil, clawing at the earth, screaming into the wind. "You can't have me!" The forest exhaled. The blast of hot air knocked me backward. I hit the ground hard, my head spinning. The compass flew from my hand and landed beside the pool, its needle twitching violently before snapping in two. When I tried to stand, the soil moved beneath my feet. The roots had come alive, curling around my ankles. Their bark was warm, slick with sap that smelled faintly of blood. From somewhere behind me came a voice, soft, broken, human. "Don't fight it!" I turned. James was there again, half-formed from the mist, his features flickering between solid and translucent. His eyes glowed faintly, his mouth trembling as though fighting to speak against something that wasn't entirely his.
"James, please," I gasped. "Help me."
He shook his head slowly. "I tried," he said. "It remembers everything that touches it. Names, voices, faces, every soul it's ever swallowed. It made me part of the..." The forest inhaled again, deeper this time, pulling him toward the pool. His body flickered, losing shape. "You can still leave," he said, "but you have to let it forget you." "How?" He looked at me with that same haunted pity I'd seen in the clearing. "Don't answer it. No matter what it says, don't look back. Don't speak your name." The trees groaned. The air grew thick with the sound of thousands of whispers blending into one endless breath. I tore free from the roots and ran. The forest howled around me, not wind, but memory, shrieking through the branches. I stumbled through the undergrowth, light flashing wildly as my torch swung from my wrist. The faces reappeared in the trunks as I passed. My parents, my brother, strangers I'd never met, all mouthing the same phrase, "Remember." I pressed my hands over my ears, but the whispers came from inside my head now. They spoke in my voice, my thoughts, my breath. "Michael, come back." The forest exhaled one last time. The force of it threw me to the ground. My head struck stone, the world spinning into blackness. When I woke, dawn was breaking. Pale sunlight spilled between the trees. The whispers were gone. The air smelled clean. For a moment I thought I'd made it. I staggered to my feet and walked until the tree line broke. My car was there, covered in dew, exactly where I'd left it. I climbed inside, shaking uncontrollably, and started the engine. The radio crackled to life. Static at first, then silence. I let out a shuddering breath, but as I pulled onto the road, something caught my eye in the rearview mirror. At first, I thought it was fog trailing behind the car. Then I realized it was smoke. The forest was breathing, a massive exhale rolling across the trees. And faintly, beneath the hum of the engine, came the whisper. "We remember you." The sound wasn't outside the car anymore. It was inside, the soft rattle of air through the vents, the rustle of my jacket, the pulse in my throat. I slammed the radio off, but another sound replaced it. A single voice, clear and unmistakable, from the passenger seat beside me. "Don't forget to remember." I turned, but the seat was empty. The compass lay there instead, cracked, needles spinning once more. By the time I reached the nearest town, the sun had fully risen, but the light felt wrong, too pale, as if filtered through smoke. The locals stared as I drove past, not with suspicion, but with something closer to pity. I parked outside a petrol station and stumbled inside, desperate for normal noise, the clatter of tills, chatter, the hum of fluorescent lights. But everything was quiet. The cashier, an old man with clouded eyes, didn't speak as I approached. He just looked at me, lips trembling slightly. "You came from the ridge," he said finally. Not a question. I nodded, throat dry. "My brother," he raised a shaking hand. "Don't say your name." My blood ran cold. "What?" He leaned closer, whispering. "It remembers through words. Through the ones who speak of it. Don't feed it again." Behind him, the security monitor flickered. The screen showed the car park. My car, empty. But the driver's door was slowly opening on its own. I turned toward the glass front of the shop. The reflection on the window was wrong. My car was there, but so was someone in the driver's seat. A pale outline, motionless, facing me. The man behind the counter whispered, "You shouldn't have brought it here." I backed away. My reflection in the window turned its head, slightly out of sync. Its lips moved before mine did. "We remember you." The lights above flickered, Every screen in the shop blinked to the same image, the forest breathing, the trees pulsing in and out like lungs. The old man began to pray under his breath. And just before the power died, before everything fell back into silence, I heard one last voice, faint, familiar, carried through the static of the monitors. James. It never forgets twice. The glass shattered outward, and from somewhere far behind me, I swore I heard the forest inhale.